大家好，我是 James 王俊英，欢迎来到 Talk with James，说说英语，聊聊生活频道。在这个视频里，我要分享一下自己的背景，让大家对我更了解。以下的内容以英语为主。Let's get started. I was born in Hong Kong, and when I was 7 years old, my mother brought me and my younger sister to immigrate to Canada, Greater Vancouver, while my father remained in Hong Kong and China to do business. I would say that my upbringing had a significant impact on me culturally because when I first came to Canada, I didn't speak a word of English. I felt like a foreigner. But as time went along, my Chinese never improved, while my English became my main language. In fact, the city where I grew up, within Greater Vancouver, had very few Chinese people. And I had only two other relatives and their families who lived nearby. Most of my relatives remain in Hong Kong, including my grandmothers. My grandfathers had passed away before I was born. So as a result, as I got older, I became more and more westernized, both in my language, expressing myself only in English, and in my cultural mindset. I was a decent student in high school and had scholarships to universities. And I could have picked any education major, but I ended up majoring in French, hoping to teach French in high school after I graduated, and minoring in Asian studies for my bachelor's degree. Many of my elective courses during my degree, I also studied a lot of psychology. And so psychology and sociology are to this day my interests. After I graduated, situations in my life guided me towards working in a church setting, in a Christian church. And I eventually became a pastor. And it was only later that I go to seminary to get my master's degree in theology. In my 20s, I met my now wife and we dated for a couple of years and then we got engaged and got married. And I have to say that my wedding day was probably one of the happiest days of my life. A few years later, our daughter Zoe was born. At the time of this video, she is around 3.5 years old. Let me share a little bit about my language learning journey. In my other videos, I had mentioned that I had studied French. I had studied the Bible languages, the original languages, which is Greek and Hebrew. And in recent years, I've begun my studies in Mandarin Chinese. But what I want to share here in this video is specific areas of my passion and my specialization in language learning. And I want to start by speaking about my journey to learn Mandarin, my as one of my focuses in recent years. The first time I learned Mandarin actually was when I took elementary Mandarin courses at UBC during my undergraduate degree. And the reason then was because I felt that I wanted to connect better with my father because my Chinese was terrible. And there's a part of me that wanted to also help him with his business in China. At that time, I knew no Mandarin and my Cantonese was very poor. And looking back, I would describe my time in learning Mandarin at UBC as one of the most embarrassing times of my life because most of the other students were native Mandarin speakers. They clearly spoke Mandarin at home. They were either from China or they were from Taiwan, and they were taking these courses as GPA boosters. But for me, I was really trying to learn Mandarin, and so I struggled so much at the beginning, even with pinyin. Like, I struggled with it so much, and I often would pronounce words wrongly, and I would use the wrong words to express myself. I couldn't understand what people were saying when they were speaking in Mandarin. And so after that time of studies, I had some sort of knowledge in Mandarin, but my Mandarin was very low, in terms of level. Years later, when I worked in my church, my second church, there were many Mandarin speakers. I felt really motivated to study Mandarin again. And so I tried hard to listen to Mandarin regularly. I actually would borrow CDs from the library and listen while I'm going jogging and exercising. I would look up words in the dictionary. I would chat with people at my church in Mandarin. It was very difficult. I struggled a lot, but I had something that kept me going. And what kept me going was purpose. A Chinese friend recently asked me why I'm working so hard to learn Mandarin. And I told her that I had two reasons. And my first reason was I want to learn Chinese for self discovery. As I shared earlier, I became very westernized when I was a child and as a teenager because I grew up here in Canada. But when I was around 25 years old, I had a sudden desire to find out who I am as a Chinese person, my ethnic background. I wanted to learn the Chinese language. I wanted to learn its culture. I wanted to learn the history. I read a lot of books about Chinese history, though at the time only in English, not in Chinese books. But I read English books about Chinese history. And I think this self discovery has actually made me more culturally Chinese in my mindset. In fact, very recently, my mother in law over dinner asked me how Chinese I was culturally when I was young. And I said, growing up, I would say I was around 5% Chinese and 95% Western. And then she asked me, how about now? And I responded by saying, probably about 30% Chinese and 70% Western. I changed over the past 10 years, 11 years or so culturally in my mindset and values as I continue this journey to learn Chinese um, and to learn my own culture, really. And then I told my friend who asked me why I was trying so hard to learn Chinese that my second reason for it is for ministry purposes, to serve people. I do want to serve the larger Mandarin speaking community. And in the future, I intend to provide Mandarin language resources to those who have no church background. And I want to share content that is from a Bible perspective, a Christian perspective, on many life topics such as sexuality or raising children or leadership. I hope that it will be helpful to people that would be watching some of my Mandarin language videos in the future. But I need to improve on my Chinese first. So yeah, so as you're learning, working hard and learning English, I'm trying to work hard and learn Mandarin. And also eventually I want to provide Mandarin language Christian resources for Christians that are Mandarin speaking on my channel as well. And so that's my Mandarin learning journey, which is a big part of who I am even to this day. And recently, I have been even reading many of Lu Xun's essay, including 肥皂, 狂人日记等等. And recently started reading 孔明兵法. So this is Zhuge Liang's the Bing Fa. And so these are kind of the ways that's really a big part of my language learning journey, even more recently. Now, let me speak a little bit about my specialization in language. Back when I was studying French in my undergrad, my specialization was actually more in linguistics, not so much in literature, but in linguistics, and specifically speaking in textual interpretation. That focus moved into my church work. And so, as I mentioned, I work as a pastor and I specialize in biblical interpretation. The technical term for it is called exegesis. Exegesis, which is the same thing as interpretation or textual interpretation. In fact, in recent years, I started to develop a couple of training sessions for my church members in biblical interpretation, exegesis, using language tools and helping them to develop skills in interpreting the original text. And so, interpretation, biblical interpretation, textual interpretation is one of my speciality. The other language related specialization of mine is public speaking. Mostly in a church setting, I do what's called preaching. I give sermons, and so on Sundays I would give a lecture, a talk for 40 to 50 minutes to explain on either a Bible passage or to explain and talk about a topic that's relevant to life today. And I have to keep the audience engaged. I have to keep them awake for 40 to 50 minutes, and so this is something I've had experience in and trained in. And in the theological world, preaching is actually there's a technical term for it called homiletics, which is the art and science of preaching, of giving these religious lectures. Generally speaking, outside of the church, it's basically just called public speaking. And so here in the West, we have this organization called Toastmasters, and they help people. And this is not in a religious setting, but they help people learn and practice public speaking, giving lectures, giving presentations, and so on. And so for this latter specialization, I do hope to provide some public speaking resources both on my channel and even for those that are interested in my tutoring service, in my language coaching service, and how to give presentations, I guess. It'll be more relevant for those giving presentations, let's say as a university student or a work presentation in English. So I hope to provide that as a part of my service. The last thing I do want to share about myself is what I think is the most important part of my life, which is my faith. That I am a Christian and I'm a follower of Jesus. Remember how I shared that when I came to Canada, I really struggled to adapt to life here. I felt like a foreigner. Well, I think the changes of being an immigrant, as well as experiencing racism from white kids and other challenges in adapting here, led me to have major anger issues. I was a very angry kid, and I would be angry regularly, like every week, for many reasons. And that anger included being angry at my own mother. And my mom and I would argue, and I would even swear at her in English. I was so angry, and I would punch holes in the walls of our previous house. I was not happy. I was constantly enraged. And it was at this low point in my life that I met Jesus Christ. I heard about the Bible's message that although God sees my sin, my anger, my bad deeds, he does judge me for my sins. But more than that, God forgives me by sending Jesus Christ, his son, to enter into human history. That Jesus became human. Jesus is God. He became human. He lived a perfect life without sin. He perfectly honored the Heavenly Father, God, and he loved people perfectly. And yet, Jesus, who never sinned, he chose to die on the cross for our sin, for my sin, because death is the consequence and punishment for sin. Jesus died for us and rose from the dead so that we don't have to die if we would believe in this message, entrust our life to him, and follow him in obedience to his word for the rest of our life. And the Bible promises this. And when I heard this as a kid, it changed me. I believed it. I became a Christian. I I experienced a transformation in my life, and I remembered that after I became a Christian, I one night knelt down at my mother's bedside, and I said to my mom, "I am so sorry, mom, for how I treated you, how angry I was. I shouldn't have said those things, and I'm asking you to forgive me." And that began a journey of healing a relationship between me and my mother. And I believe that God did that. He saved me from my sin. He saved me from my anger. He took away my rage, and he helped my mother and I reconcile in our relationship. And to this day, we have a great relationship now. Since then, I have been a follower of Jesus for over 25 years, and I have seen how life with God has purpose, it has peace, it has blessing. And that's how I want to lead my family and how I want to lead and raise my daughter. And so if you ever get to know me more, you'll inevitably know this most essential part of my life, which is my life as a Christian. And so I hope this gives you a better sense of who I am, and I do hope to see you next time. 再见。